I hope that it's giving you a more all-round perspective that I did come from a background that had nothing to do with thalassemia. I actually wanted to work with perpetrators of domestic violence and to rectify their behavior. So it was a big change for me some 11 years ago to join the thalassemia family. That has nothing to do with perpetration of domestic violence or anything like that. And it was even more challenging for me to come into this role as operations manager of the office, part of which within my role is to maintain our relationships with our external collaborators and mainly our industry partners. So that's a little bit of a context of why I was called in today to give this presentation about the opportunities that exist for fundraising for NGOs like we all are. So as TIF is a non-governmental organization that works for non-for-profit, so are all our members that are with us today and the ones that are not with us today. So thank you for having me today. I wanted to start this presentation by saying a little bit about the two most valuable lessons that I've learned whilst trying to fundraise for an international organization. And these have been painstaking messages and lessons that I've learned. Number one was the understanding that in order to fundraise, you need to build relationships. You need to build long-term relationships with your donors. You can't just receive funds and then disappear. You need to cultivate that relationship. It's a little bit like cultivating a friendship. And the second part is actually the application process. So I think that a lot of us focus on the application process and we don't focus enough on the actual building of the relationships. I know that Ken is going to discuss in his presentation on how to build a proposal and an application. So I won't go into that during my presentation. First and above all, we're all patient organizations here. We all represent patient organizations here. We need to understand our value and appreciate our value as patient organizations within the wider healthcare landscape. The healthcare landscape is a multi-stakeholder affair that has overlapping areas of interest. We each have a unique role and a unique value to bring to the table. We are all influential actors to help shape health policy, and we all bring our own assets to the table. Part of the assets that patient organizations bring, so that each of you bring to the table of the healthcare landscape to influence policy, is to bring actually the patient voice to all stakeholders, so that decisions are made in your favor, to meet your interests. Only patient organizations or patients can actually provide those valuable insights into the patient's journey and experience. It's your voice, it's our voice. So this is really important to prioritize the meaningful health outcomes, to plan services, to plan policy development, to plan clinical trials. We also have a unique position in identifying unmet needs and challenges. Nobody else can do this except us, and we need to actually acknowledge and own that fact. We also have the unique ability to bring everyone to the same table. So many times we've all been at conferences or at workshops or at meetings where we see a lot of the other stakeholders of the healthcare environment in which we all live in come together. And it's usually at the invitation of patient organizations. So we'll see healthcare professionals with us, so our treating doctors, our treating physicians. We may also see people from government authorities. We may also see payers. We may also see other affiliated professions such as researchers or academia, psychologists, nurses, etc. So we do have a unique place in this environment. But we're all scrambling for the same resources, and there's a very big inequality in the healthcare landscape. We shouldn't forget that as patient organizations, we are non-profit organizations. So we need to identify and obtain resources in order to deliver the activities which will lead to the realization of our mission. Such relationships need to be as transparent as possible and should not affect or drive the agenda of us as patient organizations. So we shouldn't be responding to requests, we should be driving those requests. Some of you that have been in the previous webinars, I was also a speaker at the first webinar that had to do with building strategies for patient organizations. I spoke to you about the development and the identification of core competencies, of the unique thing that your organization does. It could be that you are excellent in delivering educational programs. It could be that you are excellent in delivering, in raising awareness about thalassemia in your own local setting. It could be any one of a plethora of things. This is very important when you're fundraising. You need to understand what you're good at and to highlight that. Nobody's going to come and give any of us money or any other resources, whether they're in-kind resources or human resources or even volunteers. They're not going to come to help us if we do not know who we are and we don't highlight what we do. So not all funding opportunities are created the same. These depend on the resources available. So it could be resources in the knowledge and the human capacity, or in the time that each organization can devote. Luckily for us, there are a few different types of funding opportunities out there and available to us. So we can aim for the so-called low-hanging fruit, so the easy options, which may be industry funding, or private donations. So individual donors may want to contribute to the work of our organizations, or we can aim and aspire to something a little bit more difficult, but which will maintain our work in the long run and the sustainability of our organizations. And that means to aim for the funds available from foundations or from government bodies or from bilateral agencies. So this slide is the essence of my presentation today, so I'm going to walk you through it. So taking them in order, foundations. So there are many foundations out there that are available to assist us in our work. These may be private, family-owned foundations. Very often there are wealthy families in our countries that want to give back to society. So they have established their own foundations and they give back to the to civil society through grants. There are also public foundations. So one of the most famous public foundations that I'm sure that you've all heard of is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's what we call a public foundation. There are also foundations that are linked to pharmaceutical companies. So for example, Novartis has its own foundation that deals with more philanthropic projects. Then moving on. Social media. Now, I'm not very good on social media. I can just about like a story on Instagram and share something on Facebook. But apparently it's a very up and coming movement, and I'm sure that many of our younger audience today understands a little bit more of this than I do, but I put it up here as an option. So there are opportunities in social media, such as Giving Tuesday, which was established in 2016. It's a global initiative. And in 2020, it managed to, despite the pandemic, raise $116 million in 71 countries. What's very important about social media is not the ability of social media to provide funds to non-governmental organizations, such as patient organizations, but it's an opportunity to express our thanks to donors. Donors like to be appreciated, whether they're big donors or small donors, and whether they have donated online or offline, they all like to be thanked. We all like to be appreciated, and so do they. And you know, it struck me very vividly when I was preparing this presentation that about 70% of donors fail to become repeat donors, so they fail to give money again just because they don't get a note of thanks. So, you know, it's just a little bit of showing an appreciation that goes a long way to maintaining and establishing those relationships that I talked about earlier. I also found out that there's an Instagram donation button, which I'm going to go and research after this webinar to see how that works, because I've not heard about it before. So that might be something for you guys to do as homework to this webinar. So there's also the option of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a little bit tricky. It's very easy, but it's tricky in the fact that it appeals to the globe, and it needs to have a tangible result. So it's basically raising funds for something very, very specific. For example, building a new thalassemia center or something like that. Moving on to the more complex funding opportunities, then we have government and regional bodies. Now, these funding opportunities may exist as a mandate in each country, or they may not. There are regional bodies such as the European Union for our European audience today that do provide funds, but their processes are very lengthy and very complex. And that's why I said in the beginning that it depends on how much resources you are going to allocate into your fundraising. Thereafter, an interesting part is the bilateral agencies. So these are government to government or government to non-governmental organizations funds that usually have to do around youth or education or health. So it's the government to government or the country to country support. Now, there's been a recognition amongst at least the member states of the World Health Organization that NGOs have a really important role to address issues relating to human rights, education, healthcare, poverty, etc. So this is their way of giving support in that respect. The trick here is to look beyond your borders. So there's a preference for supporting NGOs based in recipient countries. So for instance, perhaps, I don't know, Norway wants to give money to Pakistan. They will look, the Norwegian government agency will look for NGOs based in Pakistan in order to fulfill those goals. So look beyond your borders. You never know where you might find some opportunity to obtain some funds for your organization. Moving on into industry. Now, there are small industries and large industries. I think that we're all familiar with proposals to industries and industry funding opportunities. These are quite easy to obtain, especially when it concerns companies that are in our field of work. So companies that either have drugs for thalassemia or are developing new therapies for thalassemia. A rising trend in some parts of the world, and I will come to this later, are legacies. So legacies are opportunities where wealthy individuals, or sometimes not so wealthy individuals, decide to leave an amount to specific non-governmental organizations upon their demise. This is a little bit morbid, but it does exist. And especially for people that we have in our network, they may be willing to leave you something when they pass away. Individual donors, so obviously people can just turn up at our door and say, you know, we want to give you so much, and that's fine. That's another way of raising funds. And then there's private companies, so private, not industry-related companies. It could be supermarket chains, it could be clothes and retail chains. They usually have corporate social responsibility programs. And they want to give back to the community in this way through donations. There are, of course, other ways to fundraise, such as events or raffles or selling merchandise, but you know, the sky's the limit, essentially. But you need to work for it. Each category has its own requirements, its category of fundraising, and at the end of the day, it takes time and human resources in order to fundraise. And when we are dealing with volunteer-based organizations, this can become quite difficult. But I'm confident and optimistic that we all have our hearts in the right place. and that we are collectively trying to achieve a better tomorrow for our thalassemia patients and the children. And so it's important to build for the future. Don't just aim for those low-hanging fruit, aim higher. So another thing that we need to consider is that each kind of fundraising opportunity needs a different approach. So you would approach individual donors different, you would approach industry partners different, and you would approach foundations differently. They all need a different approach. Everyone is increasingly, however, interested in having tangible results. So results that we can see, results that are easily visible and provable, so that they're measurable, their impact is measurable. So, you know, the donor doesn't feel that they're just giving on a never-ending basis. An important part to fundraising is to also acknowledge the regional and national attitudes and priorities. Now, I'm going to take an example from the Middle East, where there is an increasing trend in what is called legacy philanthropy. So there are a growing number of foundations of wealthy individuals that are being formed. Indeed, from 2007, when there was just 4 of them, today there is over 30 of them. And these foundations want to give back to the community. They want to demonstrate a measurable impact and to pass on the ideals of previous generations in this giving to the younger generations. And this is also reflected on a personal level too. So in a simple survey of about 1,000 individuals within the GCC state, it shows that, you know, even private citizens give a substantial amount to charities on a regular basis. And on average, more than 60% of those individual donors give to the same organization year after year. Also, what is interesting is that they also support local NGOs rather than international NGOs. So you guys who are on this webinar today, who are representing national associations, there is a lot of work there that could be acknowledged and utilized. Furthermore, the priorities of the nation and the region. So each region of the world is different. For example, there is a by and large focus on youth across the world. So activities that have to do with youth and youth empowerment are very important across the world. There's a lot of help out there. There are consultants that could be used, that they specify in charity and NGO fundraising. There is a really good site that I like to use, which is called fundsforngos.org. There is, for the USA, the Foundation Directory online. And these are just some examples of a brief... Hello? Thank you. These are just examples of some foundations and some websites that a short Google search has yielded for me. So the Asia Foundation is very focused within Asia and on education and healthcare. Yala Give, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, is an online platform that charities can register on, and it's a little bit like crowdfunding that I explained before. And of course, the Arab Council of Social Sciences is one of those legacy foundations. So the steps to fundraising success. Whether you're a small or a large organization, whether you have paid staff or you're volunteer-based, the steps are the same, and success comes in the same way. So you need to identify your needs. So identify where you're based, what your areas of work are, remember those core competencies, and what resources do you need? Do you need $1 or do you need $1,000 to meet your needs? And then you need to go out and actually research and find potential donors that match your NGO. So it's no good to approach foundations or industries or any sort of donor that is not working in your field. It's just a waste of time. So really make the effort to see where you and your donor overlap. Before you even start to think of making a proposal, you should really reach out to these people, engage with them, try to establish that collaboration, that relationship. Make an effort to network and connect, and then proceed to apply. Now, applications can have many forms. It could be just a simple letter, in the case of, let's say, a corporate social responsibility, or it could be a more official proposal in the case of industry, or it could be a grant request. It depends. Each donor has a different approach. And once you apply, then you need to follow up. Success doesn't come overnight. It takes time and effort. A well-documented application, and this is the message that I want to get across today, a well-documented application merely greases the wheels of bureaucracy. It's all the previous steps that are going to bring success. So just before closing, I wanted to use the opportunity of this talk to talk a little bit about the wider societal environment that patient organizations work in, and how NGOs and charities are perceived by the wider society. So I'm often in my personal life, when I tell people where I work, the first thing that they ask me is, oh, and how are you funded? And then there we start this whole conversation of NGOs and, oh, I heard about that NGO that mismanaged funds, or they were established and they never did anything for the people that they represented, etc. So it's very important to protect our good name. I'm very lucky to work at TIFF, where our good name has been rigidly protected from our board and especially our president, Mr. Vanos, for many years now. And therefore, I don't need to go through this process because it's second nature to us. So it's second nature for us to be transparent, to disclose the names of our supporters, to disclose the percentage of funds between industry and other sources that we receive, to disclose our board members' employment information or other affiliations. There is, especially in some parts of the world, many board members of patient organizations have a conflict of interest. So they're either healthcare professionals or they've actually worked in industry. And it's very difficult to convince people that there's not a mismanagement there if these things are ongoing. Furthermore, we need to protect our integrity through diversification. So the more, the merrier, especially when it comes to events. It's very important to have more than 2 donors per event. And that way it doesn't, it's not perceived as if the event is driven by that donor. Furthermore, financial independence. So credibility is very important for patient organizations. This credibility can come through, let's say, limiting the proportion of industry funds to an upper threshold. So we can say that I will only accept X amount for industry per year, and that the rest needs to be sourced by other funds, by other donors, sorry. And then, of course, the impartiality. So this comes from a more academic discussion and practices, but there is the thought that patient organizations could set up an independent ethics committee in order to satisfy and protect their good name, and then impartiality. What each patient organization decides to do is up to them, but it's very important to protect our good name. Now, what other patient organizations do could be a simple code of ethics. So TIFF, you will see here on your screen, has a policy of corporate and financial support. This essentially includes the following. So the disclosure of the amounts and sources, as I've mentioned before, and the public acknowledgement of funders. So if you go on our website, you will obviously see the logos of our funders, and this should be a practice for everyone. Our projects or our activities are always aligned with our mission and objectives. They're not driven by our sponsors. They're not driven by our supporters or our donors. We go out and say we want to do this. this will help the patient community. And then that's how we attract donors. It shouldn't be the other way around. And next week, when we talk about valuable and meaningful activities, that will be the theme of next week's webinar, how to achieve this impartiality in all our projects and activities. Our events are multi-sponsored. There's no control over the program, topics, or choice of speakers. And this is because we have more than one sponsor per event. Now, when we participate in industry-led activities, we are very careful, and you should be also, not to be involved in corporate communication or press releases. So it's very important to maintain that distance. We are friends, but we're not, best friends. And then when it comes to compensation and honoraria for participation in events or advisory boards, etc., it's always a good practice, instead of providing to the individual, to provide to the patient organizations. And definitely the promotion of specific products or services by patient organizations or board members of the patient organizations is a big no-no. My conclusion, and I will end here because I think I've taken up too much of your time, is that there are opportunities out there, but a tailored approach is required in order to get these donors in. One size does not fit all. It takes time, it takes human resources, and it takes knowledge. And I'm sure that you all have it. You all have the passion to work and to provide the time and the knowledge and the expertise to each one of your patient organizations. And I'm more than certain that you are more than confident to raise enough funds for that organization. And please remember to be ethical within your fundraising activities, and to always take a light from TIFF and its board members that have maintained that good credibility for 35 years now. So with that, I will leave you. Thank you very much.